All right, welcome back for our second part of today's daily Bible reading. And we have yet another location and even a costume change, so to speak. But welcome back to Daily Bible with Chris. Hopefully, you've already watched the previous posting for today where we began the book of Esther. Esther just has 10 chapters in it. So we started with Esther chapter 1 and read through chapter 5. And then tomorrow we will finish the book of Esther. And so if you have not already watched that video, I would encourage you to stop this video now, go back and watch that, or either pause this and open your Bible up and read those 5 chapters so that you get a little bit of understanding. You've at least read the story, and then we're going to go back through and do a little bit of explanation, a little bit of Bible study through it again. This is never exhaustive, but just pointing out some things so that we understand kind of what's going on in context and such. And if you're watching this on the YouTube channel, Daily Bible with Chris, I would really encourage you to give the video a like, if you would, and if you've not already subscribed to the channel, please do that and drop a comment. Today happens to be my birthday, so if you were ever going to drop a comment, you can drop a comment and wish me a happy birthday. I know it's very self-promoting there. Sorry, I'm enjoying the last couple of hours. As I record this, it's in the evening. So I had a video this morning because I was behind yesterday, and one at midday in the car, and then now here today. So, but you fall behind by one video, and boy, it just puts you behind the 8 ball a little bit. But I've had a great day, and glad that you're joining me as we've done this. So as we mentioned earlier, as we dive into this, the book of Esther actually kind of rewinds a little bit, and we're going to see this as we go forward with some of the priests, some of the prophets we'll go through. Some of the prophets that we will read later on will be happening during some of the events we've already talked about during the return from the exile, prior to the exile, etc. And as we pointed out, Esther takes place back at right in the kind of somewhere in the middle of the rebuilding of the temple, prior to Ezra making his way into back into Judah. So it takes place between chapter 6 and chapter 7 of the book of Ezra. 1 through 6 of Ezra is kind of Ezra's history of Zerubbabel and that group going back, the 50,000 men going back there and going through the process over about a 20-year period of rebuilding the temple, making the second temple. And then somewhere after that is when the events of this is going to take place, of this story is going to take place. And then, of course, you've got after this, you've got Ezra coming into and then, of course, Nehemiah follows that as well. So again, you've kind of got the events of Ezra to about halfway point. Esther takes place, the rest of the events of Ezra, and then Nehemiah. That's kind of how these 3 books work together. And this is taking place around 482, 483 BC, so about 480 years before Christ or so. The king is in the Persian Empire. The king on the throne is in the book, he's referred to Ahasuerus. He's also known, though, more historically as King Xerxes. This is the king of Persia that will go to war with the Greeks. And we have the famous Battle of Thermopylae that takes place, the Battle of the 300 Spartans. This is that same Xerxes who will be ultimately defeated by the Greeks. And so while this is going on, Persia is still the empire. The Greeks have not yet risen up to their empire status. They're still a bunch of city-states, like Athens and Sparta and such. And in fact, it's interesting because we have the Olympics going on right now. When this is during this year, this was an Olympiad year. This would have been the 79th Olympiad in Athens in Greece. So just do a little tie in there. So just kind of painting the picture historically. And so what we have going on here, we have King Ahasuerus. He's in the palace of Susa. We mentioned this before. We mentioned this in the book of Nehemiah, that in the Persian Empire, there were 3 separate locations where the king of Persia would move his court, his palace to, based on the seasons. And one of these places was a citadel fortress in a city called Susa, or Shusha, as it's referred to in other places. But we notice here in chapter 1, there's going to be a series of feasts. He's going to hold, this was not unusual for kings. They would throw these parties and celebrations to display their grandeur and such. And so in fact, he's going to throw a feast. It's in the 3rd year of his reign. He's going to throw a feast for all of his nobles and officials and everybody. And he puts on his best show. And this celebration is going to last for 180 days. So it's a half-year celebration. It's like having Christmas for 6 months. I mean, that's kind of what we've got going on here, or the greatest birthday you've ever had for 6 months. That's what we've kind of got going on. And then after that, he's going to have a secondary, much smaller celebration that he's going to have. And we have some descriptions and such of things that are going on. But in this secondary feast, this is for a smaller, more distinct group of people. We see also there's rules. There's a lot of drinking and things going on as would have happened in a case like this. But the king, normally it's expected in the ancient times, you had to at least take a drink or you were removed from the party. But he's going to say, basically, there are no restrictions. In other words, you can drink as much as you want, or if you don't want to drink, you don't have to do that. And so we see this kind of going on. And then we are introduced to the queen of Persia, Queen Vashti. And she is giving a feast for the women of King Ahasuerus' palace. So while all of the men are with the king having a rip-roaring time, so to speak, the queen is going to throw a party or throw a feast for her ladies and the wives of those officials and those in the palace. So we've got kind of these three things going on. And it says here on the seventh day of this kind of secondary banquet feast that he's having, by this point, the king is good and soused. That's the southern term for it. He's good and drunk. He's feeling, it says here, he's feeling good from the wine. He's got that. This is more than just a buzz. He's just not feeling anything. And we see here he's there with his eunuchs that serve him. And probably in just a drunken stupor, he gets this idea that he's going to have the queen appear before him, and he wanted to show off her beauty to the people and the officials. Now, the idea, I think Josephus and some others expound on this, say that maybe they were having a little competition between the officials, because these were officials from all different provinces of the empire, and there was maybe like a little bit of a beauty contest going on. Who's got the most beautiful woman from what country? That may be what's going on here. The indication is this is not just that the queen would come and sit at the table and be there. It doesn't say it, but it's kind of implied that the expectation would be that she would come and perhaps remove her clothing, come nude, so they could actually, gawk and look at her naked body. And so, in essence, that's kind of the implication here, if we kind of read between the lines of what's going on. So I don't think it's just the fact that because Queen Vashti is going to repulse this and refuse to do, and so I don't think it's just the fact that she's saying, I'm not at his beck and call. I don't think that. I think it's she did not want to do this, and probably not out of any great modesty, maybe, but maybe she did not want to be made a fool of, made a mockery of with a bunch of drunk men, naked. And so he wants to do this. It tells us that she was very beautiful. A lot of times the Bible can be very understated. So more than likely she was probably a 10 out of 10. She was a very beautiful woman, but she's going to refuse to come. This is going to make the king angry. And it says his anger burned with him. And historically, we know this about Xerxes. He had a very bad temper, a very bad anger. He would get mad at people. He would get mad at things that were just not even logically makes no sense. I mean, he got mad at some guys that historically they built a bridge for him. The bridge is destroyed by a rogue wave, and he has them all executed and punished for the fact that the waters and the rain, the waves of the ocean and the rivers came and knocked it over. They had nothing to do with that. And in fact, he supposedly had the waters chained and whipped to punish them, as if he could punish nature. So, I mean, he's a very eccentric fellow, but he has a very strong anger, and it's going to last for a while. And so he doesn't want to do anything too rash. He's going to consult and say, what should we do here? And they're going to give him the advice that they're worried that this idea of the queen refusing the king, that could set a bad precedent. That, in other words, the other women, the other wives of the kingdom might get it in their minds to refuse their husbands, because that was just not done at that point. You served, you obeyed your husband without question, and especially when you're the queen. And so they're like, what will happen? If she's allowed to get away with this, then we're gonna have a problem here. And so it's going to become public knowledge. It's going to get out, and it's going to cause all these issues. And so they come up with this plan to remove the crown from her head. To depose her as queen, and then to replace her. And the idea is they're going to bring in the most beautiful women from the entire kingdom. And in essence, it's like Miss Persian Empire, 483 BC. It's like the Miss America pageant. We're going to bring all the best looking, most promising young, it's virgins, in other words, unmarried women. They'll join this harem. We'll go through this whole process. They'll join the king's harem, and of these nearly, I think it's 400 women that will actually be brought in. The king will spend a time with each of them, and then ultimately he will make a choice for a replacement queen. So that's how we end chapter 1, with this idea. He agrees with it. He likes the plan. Let's be honest, guys. Not as a Christian per se, but as a worldly pagan man, who would not want the most beautiful woman in the world being brought to you and for you to have as you want from it? So, that's so it probably was not a hard sell to sell the king on that. Now, doesn't say this here, but it's listed later in chapter 2. There's this, when you read chapter 1 and 2, it seems like they happen like within a few days of each other. But in fact, if you actually look at the time that's mentioned in chapter 2 later on, it appears there's a couple of years takes place between chapter 1 and chapter 2. And in fact, during that time frame, during that intervening years there. So again, it takes a little while for this plan to go into effect. The Xerxes has been busy. This is when, during this break between chapter 1 and chapter 2, will be when the failed invasion of Greece takes place, the defeat to the Greeks. So he's smarting from that a little bit. And so if you kind of understand that, and the only way you know that is just researching the history and looking at the timelines and such. But it says, sometime later, when King Ahasuerus' rage had cooled down, whether that's still the rage at the queen or the rage at the fact he was defeated, I think it sounds like it's with Queen Vashti, but I think if historically we're accurate in there being this kind of time jump between chapter 1 and chapter 2, it could be just his anger over the defeat to the Greeks. That would kind of make sense. He remembered Vashti. He remembered what it had, because he's been gone away. He went with his forces to invade the Greeks, and so he's been gone for a while. And he remembered that whole situation, and of course this idea that they're going to bring in all these beautiful young virgins. All of those, that plan is put into place for them. And so they go and they bring in all of these women, and they're put into this harem under the king's eunuch, Haggai. Of course, as a eunuch, he would be safe to be with all the women, so to speak. And they said, whichever the women pleases the king, she will become queen instead of Vashti. And so we're introduced to that situation. At the same time, we're introduced at the fortress there of Susa, in the citadel. There's a Jewish man by the name of Mordecai. And Mordecai is from the tribe of Benjamin. And of course, we know there was a close relationship between Judah and Benjamin, of course, the southern kingdom. And his family obviously had been taken off by the Babylonians in the exile. And so we see that we're introduced to Mordecai, and then we're introduced to his cousin, whose Jewish name is Hadassah, which is translated, actually means myrtle, like myrtle tree. But her Persian name is Esther, which means star. And we see the idea that Mordecai was her cousin, and that when her parents died, she's an orphan. Mordecai takes her in and basically raises her as his own daughter. And she's described as well as a young woman with a beautiful figure and was extremely good looking. So again, Vashti may have been a 10. It sounds like Esther may have been an 11. We might have been taking it all the way up to 11. So we have this description here that she's very beautiful. But we're also going to see she's beautiful not only on the outside, but on the inside as well. And so we see that all these women are brought to this place, Susa, under the eunuch Haggai's supervision. There's a whole protocol put in place for the women, that they're to be, they're to have all this beauty treatments and such done to them. There's a special diet that in other words, they're trying to get them looking their best, feeling their best, so that when they appear before the king, she's at her best. She's at her absolute peak of beauty and physical attraction. And of course, the Persians were known for this. They were known for their aromatic scents and spices and such. And so we're going to see this. We have handpicked servants and such that are doing this, and they're going to transfer them to their quarters. And we see that Esther is not going to let them know that she's a Jew. And this is because Mordecai, for whatever reason, tells her not to reveal that, probably under the prompting of the Holy Spirit not to do that. There's really no reason to not do it at this point, but we're going to see why in a few minutes, why that's a smart decision that happens. And so And so we're going to see that. So, and then we see Mordecai. It tells us that he takes walks every evening to the area of the harem's courtyard. There's a fountain there. He sees Esther every day. He's checking in on her. How's it going? How are you? Those kinds of things are going on. And then, in addition to what's already been going on, we're going to see here that the harem was required to receive beauty treatments of oil and myrrh for 6 months. So, ladies, if you're watching this, it's a 6 month trip to the day spa. Who wouldn't want that, right? And then another 6 months of perfumes and cosmetics for that. So you have a 1 year beauty day, beauty treatment, spa day, and every need and desire, everything that you want, and and we see that Esther finds favor with the eunuch Haggai. The other reason that I've read of why there was such a long period of time of the preparation for them before coming to the king was to make sure that none of these women were pregnant prior to. They may have posed as virgins, but maybe they were already pregnant or got pregnant, during this time frame, and then would spend their time with the king and try to claim that they have an heir with the king, right? Which could be problematic. And so by having this amount of time, they can be observed and to see that none of them are with child, or if they did, they could quickly remove them from the harem. And so, so we see these things are happening. There's a whole protocol that they're going through, and the idea was each woman would be given one evening with the king, with no guarantee that they would ever be called back. And then after their one night, one woman would be picked to be queen. The other 399 would go permanently into the king's harem with no guarantee that they would ever see the king again. They might get called back as like a mistress, basically they're treated like concubines or wives, but just not the queen. So they might come back and have time with the king, but there's no guarantee of it. But they would not be allowed to marry anyone else. So in essence, they would live the rest of their lives almost like being living widows. But we see here that Esther, that when it came her time to go to the king, she didn't ask for anything except what the Haggai, the king's eunuch, suggested. And Esther gained favor in the eyes of everyone who saw her. So we see the Lord working, that her beauty, but also just her humility and a way about her, she impresses everybody. She impresses Haggai, she impresses the others. And so she's taken to King Ahasuerus there. And we see this here in the 10th month of Tebeth in the 7th year of his reign. So remember, this is how we know that there's about a 4-year time jump, because what? Chapter 1, he has the feast. It's in the third year of his reign. Let me do it. Third year of his reign, and now we see it's in the 7th year of his reign. Now we've had a year of beauty treatments and such. So in that 4 years, there's been a bit of a time jump there, and we're going to see that she won favor with the king. She won favor with him over all the other women, and so he is going to place the crown on her head. She is crowned queen in place of Vashti. Vashti is exiled or what have you. She is deposed, and the king's going to hold a banquet for her in place of that. And then we're told toward the end that when the virgins were gathered a second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. So during a time of gathering of these women in the harem, not counting Esther, more than likely at this point, she again does not reveal her ethnicity again. And so she's going to obey that. So we see that repeated a couple times. They're making it important. And Mordecai is sitting at the king's gate, which kind of indicates he had some type of official job in the empire. And he's going to discover that 2 of the king's eunuchs are angry with the king and that they're going to assassinate him. And assassinations against Xerxes was something to be very to be worried about. In fact, Xerxes will be assassinated many years later, and he's replaced by a man by the name of Artaxerxes, who we met in the book of Nehemiah. So ultimately, he does get assassinated later on by one of his officials, but not yet. Mordecai smells out this plot. He's going to report it to Esther, the queen. The queen reports it to the king. It's found out to be true. The 2 eunuchs are executed. They are put up on a pole. It says here they're put on a gallows and hanged. We like to look at that and think of, traditional hanging somebody by the neck. That's not necessarily what they meant with the Persians. The Persians, they would have a pole, and the person would be either impaled on the pole or pierced with a spike or a nail of some sort of very rough early form of crucifixion. And they would be hung on the tree, hung on the wooden piece there, the wooden stake or the wooden tree or what have you, until they died. Very brutal death. And so we see that Mordecai saves the king's life. And it says right there at the end that this is a record of this event is kept in the King's Chronicles. That's going to be important later on. In chapter 3, we see King Ahasuerus, we're introduced to a man by the name of Haman. It says, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite. This Haman is a descendant of King Agag. We remember him all the way back in the time of the children of Israel coming into the Promised Land, and one of the biggest enemies that they would have is the Amalekites. And remember there being a King Agag who was a constant problem for the Jews there and the Hebrews there in Israel, and the Amalekites, and so the Amalekites hated the Jews. The Jews did not like the Amalekites. And so we see this here. So we find Haman, a descendant of King Agag, who had caused some issues in the past. And we're going to see that Haman is still holding that grudge. And I think we're going to see Mordecai knows that he's a descendant, and there's a little bit of reciprocal there, but not to the degree of Haman. But Haman is promoted and becomes basically the second in command of the entire Persian Empire. The king gives him a lot of titles and money and such. And as Haman rides through the town and walks through the town, everybody pays homage to him. There's no necessarily command to it, but they're paying homage to him. But we notice Mordecai refuses to pay homage to him, probably because as a Jewish Benjaminite, he's not going to bow to a descendant of basically an Amalekite. He's not going to do it because he knows that they are enemies of God, enemies of Yahweh. And so even some are going to ask him, why are you disobeying the king's command? Why aren't you bowing? Why aren't you? But he's not doing it. And word is going to get back to Haman that Mordecai, the Jew, refuses to pay homage to him. And it's going to make him so angry. And when he finds out that Mordecai is a Jew, we kind of get the idea that Haman already had an issue with the Jews. Why? Because he's an Amalekite. And of course, they had problems with the Jews, right? And so there's already that deep-seated anger. And so he decides he's going to punish, he's going to destroy Mordecai, but he's not going to just stop right there. He has now a plan to eliminate the Jews. He's used this as his excuse to get rid of the Jews and basically settle an old score of the Amalekites and the Jews. And so we see, as we continue to read through it, it's in the 12th year now. So we've jumped from the 7th year when Esther's crowned queen. Now it's been 5 years later when some of these events are happening. We're going to see, and of course, this whole story of Esther and the attempt to kill them and their saving, as we're going to see, spoiler, saving from Haman. This is going to launch the festival of Purim, which you'll see that Jews still celebrate today. It's a bit of a riotous festival, but they celebrate the saving of the Jewish people from Haman and through Esther. And this is Purim. And the reason it's called that is part of it is because of the or the lot was cast by Haman. And from that, he decided what month he would, once he got approval from the king, in what month he would kill the Jews. And so he tosses the lot. It lands on, he's in the first month of the year. It lands on the 12th month of the year. So he knows there's 11 months between now when he's going to try to present his plan to the king and he by casting lots before, I guess, whatever gods he was serving. And so he sees, okay, I'm going to have it'll give me 11 months to get everything in place to execute my plan to destroy them. And so he's going to come to the king, and he's basically going to lie to him and say, oh, there's these people, these Jews, and they're a rebellious people, and they're not for the king, and they don't do this and they don't do that, and we need to punish them because they're not obeying your laws. They have their own laws. Now, of course, they did have their law, the law of Moses they followed, or at least those who were following it in captivity or in exile. But they were still being mostly good citizens. But yet Haman's going to convince him, and he's going to tell him, if you let me do this, if you let me destroy this, root out this rebellious group, get rid of these lawbreakers, I'll pay you a bunch of silver, 375 tons of silver. Now, where is he going to get the silver from? He says, well, I'm going to give you, if you let me do this, I'll have a bunch of money to give to you. He's going to steal it from the dead Jews. Not unlike the Germans in World War II, who stole all the money and the gold and the artwork and all the different things, even the hairs on their head and the eyeglasses and the shoes and whatever. They stole everything from the Jews on their way to the concentration camps, right? It's not that different from that. And so the king probably underestimated what the amount of Jew problem this was, how many Jews this would be killing. And so he's going to go along with it. The king's going to put his signet ring, meaning he's sealing it, And we know already that in Persia, the king's word was law. There was no rescinding it. We're going to find that out in this story. You could, once it became law, it was law, and there was no changing the law. We'll see that as well in the book of Daniel, right? King Darius has, I don't want to jump ahead, but there's a law there that Darius could not break because he got tricked into signing something, and it nearly cost Daniel his life, but he's saved by God. But there's copies of these letters are sent out telling everybody what's going to happen, that the Jews are going to be killed because of their evil actions. And it names the date when that's going to happen on the 13th day of Adar, which is the 12th month. And a copy of this law, this statement from the king, is sent throughout the entire province, throughout the entire kingdom. And we have a lot of weeping and obviously worry by the Jewish people of the king's just pronounced our death sentence. And if they find out we're Jews, we're going to die. And it tells us that the king and Haman sat down to drink, probably feeling pretty good about what they've just done. Haman's got what he's wanted. The king's been tricked into thinking he's doing something good for his kingdom. And it says the city of Susa was in confusion, probably because where did this come from? The Jews have never been a problem for us. They're good citizens. We know Mordecai, so there's confusion through this. And so we jump to chapter 4. Mordecai is going to hear about all of this. Of course, he's going to do something we've seen other Jews do when there's difficult times. He's going to tear his clothes. He puts on the sackcloth burlap clothes. He's going to put ashes or dirt on his head. He's going to weep and mourn bitterly. He's going to go out to the king's gate. He's not allowed to wear sackcloth into the king's, past the king's gate. So he's going to go as far and as close to the king's fortress there as possible, make a big spectacle of himself before hopefully maybe getting the attention of the king, but as well before the Lord. He's fasting, he's weeping, he's lamenting, he's doing all of these things. And we're going to see Esther is going to send news with some clothes for Mordecai, basically saying, get dressed. Why are you making such a big spectacle? She doesn't yet know what's happened. He's going to then Mordecai's going to send word back to Esther, telling him exactly what's going to happen, that Haman has conspired with the king to put this plot in place where he's going to kill all the Jews, and he's going to steal all the Jews' money, and he's going to put a bunch of money. And so he explains all of that to her. And so Mordecai is going to tell her that you have to do something. You have to go to the king. You have to talk to the king. You're the only one that can save us. And she's going to tell Mordecai that I can't. I haven't been summoned, because back then the queen could not just show up in the king's presence. They lived in separate parts of the palace. They lived in separate rooms, except for when they came together or the king wanted her to be there, whether to be there for a function or to come together sexually. And so you can see it's not a very intimate relationship, because the king, Esther's going to say, I haven't been summoned to the king in 30 days. And over a month, I haven't seen the king. And to go into the king's presence without his summoning was a death penalty, unless the king extended his scepter towards you. In other words, unless he gave you the approval to come in, and you didn't know if you would have that or not. And so Esther's going to respond back to it saying, I haven't been summoned, and to go into the king unsummoned is a death sentence. But then Mordecai's going to tell her, do you think you're going to escape this? Do you think by your silence and your inactivity, you're going to escape Haman's plot? It's going to be found out that you're a Jew, and you'll be put to death just like the rest of us. You're going to die. And if you keep silence, we know that deliverance for the Jewish people, because of God's promise of a remnant, that the Messiah is going to come. David will always have someone on the throne. They know that promise. They're going to say, deliverance may come from someone else, but if you do this, you and your family will be destroyed. But perhaps, Mordecai says, perhaps your position in the kingdom as the queen, your royal position has happened for such a time as this. In other words, you've been put in the right place at the right time to help save your people. That's the reason why you were shown favor to all in the court and favor to the king. Maybe that's why God's been working. And again, we mentioned that God is not mentioned by name in this book. But we see God working behind the scenes throughout all of it. And so Esther's going to send a reply back to Mordecai and tell him basically to assemble all the Jewish people there in the city together and have them fast for me. Don't eat or drink for 3 days. And that she, Esther, and her servants, they're going to do the same thing. So we're going to see fasting of no food and no water, which is pretty extreme. You go a couple of days without water. You can go a while without food. You go without water for a couple of days. That can be detrimental to you. And so we see once again the importance of fasting to appeal to God, to appeal to the favor of the Lord, to make sure that what she's doing is right. And she says, after that, after the 3 days, on that third day, I will go to the king. And if I perish, I perish. Or if I die, I die. Because if I don't do anything, I'm going to die anyway. And so Mordecai is going to do that. They're going to go away. They're going to fast for the 3 days. Esther's going to do that. And so that brings us to chapter 5. On the third day, Esther dressed in her royal clothing and stood in the inner courtyard of the palace facing it. And the king's sitting on the throne in his courtroom facing it. And he sees Queen Esther. She's at the opposite side of the courtyard. And there's this moment. Is she going to die? Is this the last day she'll see on earth? Or is the king going to extend his scepter toward her? And we see that the king extends the gold scepter toward Esther. Esther will then approach. She touches the tip of the scepter and she's okay. And the king's going to ask her, what is it? What do you need? Whatever you want, up to half of the kingdom. I mean, I'm sure that's probably just talk, but still, God's working. Remember Proverbs 21:1. The king moves the Lord moves the king's heart whichever way he wants, like rivers of water. We see this happening here. And she's going to say she's got a plan. Her plan is she wants to try to get the king on her side, and then she's going to reveal what Haman's plot is and what he's done. And so she invites the king and Haman to come and enjoy a banquet. She's going to put on a banquet for the king and Haman. And of course, we know this king is up for a good party whenever there's a party. And he says, absolutely, hurry, go get Haman, get dressed, and we're going to come to this banquet that Esther has requested. And so we see that they come, they're drinking wine, and the king's feeling really good. And he turns to Esther again and says, again, whatever you ask, even up to the half the kingdom, what do you want? And we see here, Esther, maybe she loses her nerve a little bit, or maybe she feels like she's not quite got the king where she wants him. But she's like, this is my petition, my request. If it's found favor, I want you and Haman to come back again tomorrow for another banquet. And then tomorrow I will do what the king has asked. In other words, I'm not quite ready to reveal to you what I want, but if you'll come back tomorrow for the second banquet, I'll tell you then. And so Haman's feeling good after this. Hey, the king was invited and I'm the only other official that was invited. I must be something. And Haman's walking through and, you just kind of see him strutting, right? Kind of vision. But then he sees Mordecai at the king's gate. Remember, Mordecai probably still wearing his sackcloth and ashes and such. And once again, Mordecai does not rise. He doesn't tremble. It says he doesn't tremble in fear. Haman's a very insecure popinjay, and Mordecai, he's not given into his ego. He's not fearful of him. He doesn't fear what Haman can do to him. But Haman, we're going to see, is filled with rage toward Mordecai. That anger he has for Mordecai is turned up once again, even hotter. And but he controls himself. He doesn't make a scene. He doesn't do anything to Mordecai right then. He doesn't want to ruin the good thing he's got going with the king and the queen. So he's going to go home. He's going to tell it. What is he going to do? Like any man, he's going to go home and tell his wife all about it, right? And so she describes all this for and he's going to describe not only what happened, but he's going to describe all this stuff to a lot of the people that are around him. And he's going to tell them, hey, look, the Queen Esther has invited me to a banquet today. She's invited me back tomorrow. I'm in good. Everything's going great. But even though all that's going, even though I'm number 2 in the kingdom, even though I've got more money than I can ever do anything with, I've got favor with the queen. Everything's going great for me. It wasn't enough. It doesn't satisfy him. Why? Still, none of it satisfies me because one Jewish man by the name of Mordecai doesn't give him the respect he thinks he's owed. And he's sitting at the king's gate. He's sitting there and he makes a mockery of me. And so his wife tells him, hey, go construct a gallows. In other words, construct a large pole or large wooden beam. It says here 75 feet tall. Now, the fortress walls of Susa was approximately around 70 to 75 feet. So maybe he was just building the gallows up on top of the wall itself, or it could have been a 75-foot tall. I mean, that's a big and prominent. So in other words, I'm going to kill Mordecai on this gallows and I'm going to make sure everybody sees it. Look what Haman does to people that don't respect him. And he likes the idea, and he's got the idea. Tomorrow at the banquet, I will ask for the king to let me go to the banquet. I'll enjoy myself, have the gallows created. And when it comes time to kill the Jews, that's the thing. That's how you will kill Mordecai. And so that's where we end our reading. So halfway through the book. So we've got this drama going on here. How is God going to save the Jews from evil Haman, who's plotting against them? And we've got Mordecai and Esther, the heroes of the Jewish people. And so tomorrow we'll pick up in chapter 6. We're going to see how things are going to get flipped on their head for poor Haman, and that yes, through Esther and through Mordecai, the Jewish people will survive. They will carry on, and of course, God will protect His people. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a little better understanding of things there, and I hope that was helpful to you. Again, like the video if you would. It just helps me know when people are watching. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe so you get the daily notices of these videos when I post them. And just drop me a comment if you'd like to in the comment section. I really appreciate that as well. So God bless you. We'll see you back here tomorrow for Esther chapter 6. See you then.